All right. So today I just want to have a little bit of a chat with you about a few things that will give you not just tips and tricks, but I really want to give you some advice just to keep in the back of your mind as you start on your journey to. Hi, Slim. I've just
Hi,
woken up and I've started the recording.
Oh, all right.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to give you some advice, some things to keep in the back of your mind, and also some tips and tricks about a few different areas that will likely be quite important to you as you go along and get more into the whole process. So the topics that I want to discuss today are around nutrition and a particular syndrome called RED-S and around iron as well. I want to encourage the consultation of experts when it's appropriate and the importance of rest and recovery. I want to talk a little bit about prehab and rehab, a bit about your pelvic floor, which is an incredibly important part of your body, comfort across all of the disciplines, and then your chest, be it a boy chest, a girl chest, boobs, no boobs, and that sort of thing. So I want to start off around the role of nutrition. Nutrition provides you with, I'm just flipping around here. Nutrition provides you with energy to train and to race. It also supports your recovery and regeneration of your body tissues, which is required to improve your sports performance. And many people have experienced DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness. So, you know, when you wake up tomorrow morning after a bit of a workout and everything's sore, that's very minor muscle damage caused by that physical activity that's greater than what you would normally do. That muscle damage prompts your body to adapt and get stronger so it can meet the new demands that you're placing on it. So when you increase your activity, it's a new demand and your body has to adapt and get stronger to be able to do it. Now, it can't actually do that unless it's got the right fuel. So you need to think of yourself like a sports car, which requires unleaded 98 fuel. But if you don't eat well, you're only putting 95 into it. So your car will function, but it won't function as well as if you give it what it actually needs. And the same goes for your body. If you eat well, your body will reward you by performing well, getting stronger, and improving your performance generally. But if you eat poorly or less than you need, particularly over a longer period of time, you do run the risk of more significant issues. And one of those significant issues is called RED-S. So it stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. And it's a syndrome which is characterized by disordered eating, which is typically low energy availability, the absence of periods, amenorrhea in women, and decreased bone mineral density. And that could be osteoporosis or osteopenia. And osteopenia is the precursor to osteoporosis. Now, previously it was known as the female athlete triad, but they changed the name of it because men can experience the same sorts of things, obviously not the menstrual issues, but all of the other things, and particularly the low bone density. The symptoms of it are disordered eating. So if you are cutting back on the amount that you eat in order to reach, some sort of body type goal or ideal, if you like. So a lot of sports that people tend to experience with are like gymnastics and those sorts of things where you need to have a certain aesthetic. It also happens in triathlon and other endurance sports because we want to be incredibly lean and light in order to make our sport a bit easier. So people will eat less, but it's a bad thing. Other symptoms include fatigue, hair loss, having cold hands and feet so you don't have that good blood supply to the extremities, dry skin, noticeable weight loss, and then things like increased healing time from injuries. So you might bump yourself and get a bruise and it takes a lot longer to heal than you would expect, or a small cut or something will take a while to heal as well. There's an increased incidence of bone fracture, and that can be things like stress fractures. And it doesn't even have to be a stress fracture. It can be a stress response, which is the start of a stress fracture, and then the absence of periods. So you might experience it as reduced performance, excessive fatigue, and missing periods, not for boys, obviously, or people without uteruses or premenopause, postmenopausal. But in the longer term, you run the risk of osteopenia and then osteoporosis. And anyone who's had a loved one fracture a hip, that you'll know that that is definitely not a good thing. Now, the other thing is iron. Iron is needed for the transport of oxygen around the body and also energy production. So it's a really important micronutrient for sport and exercise performance. Athletes who are involved in regular intensive exercise can quite quickly deplete their iron stores and are at risk of developing iron deficiency and or anemia. So that's a condition where there's just not enough red blood cells. Dietary iron recommendations are 1.3 to 1.7 times higher for athletes than non-athletes, and 1.8 times higher for vegetarians than meat eaters. Female athletes typically have considered to have an increased risk of having low iron, which might lead to an iron deficiency. And that's because of a negative iron balance caused by inadequate dietary iron intake, periods, particularly very heavy periods, increased iron losses associated with hemolysis, and hemolysis is the death of red blood cells, and it's typically running related. And what happens is when you run, you are literally squashing the red blood cells that are in the blood vessels in the base of the sole of your feet. So every time you run, you kill a couple of little red blood cells. And if you are a particularly long distance runner, you're going to be killing a lot of them. And once they die, they can't carry iron around. Sweating is also a big cause of a reduction of iron in your body, and also exercise-induced acute inflammation. So anytime there's any kind of damage in your body, be it, good or bad, well, when I say good, I mean, the minor muscle injury, which promotes strength and so on. Anytime there's any kind of little bit of injury, your body creates an inflammatory response, and that goes in and it helps heal it, cleans up any destroyed tissue and so on. So the iron gets lost in that, it gets used up. So all of these things will contribute to iron depletion. Now, the signs and symptoms that you might feel will be, you might feel really flat and tired, you can't train as much as usual. Other things can include a poor appetite, more colds and other sorts of infections, an increased resting heart rate. You might look pale, but sometimes there's just no symptoms at all, or they're really quite vague, and they can be easily confused with overtraining or infection like a cold or glandular fever or something like that. But then again, you might also experience some of these symptoms, but they are just the result of normal fatigue associated with your training. Now, iron deficiency goes through 3 stages, and you can only find out where you are in the process by a blood test. So the first stage is iron store depletion, and that is evidenced by a decreased level of ferritin in your blood, so serum ferritin. The next stage is decreased iron transportation, and that's evidenced by decreased iron in your blood. And then anemia or iron deficiency is decreased hemoglobin in your blood. Now, I wanted to really talk about those 3 stages, because anyone who gives blood, they go off and they test your hemoglobin level before they let you give blood. And a lot of people think that they're okay. If they've got good heme level, they think they're all right from a blood from an iron perspective. But that's the last thing. That's the last stage. So if you go and give blood and they will go to give blood and they say no because your heme's low, you are well into anemia and all of the other stages you've already passed through. So I just really wanted to point that out to you, that you don't know it just by the way that you feel, and you really do need to have a good complete blood test to find it out properly. So what we can do on a day-to-day basis to prevent, maybe not prevent, but limit the risk of having iron depletion, is making sure that we increase our total consumption of iron-rich foods every day. So that's eating lean meat, red meat, poultry, fish and seafood every day. Red meat at least 3 or 4 times a week. Vegetarians have different requirements. They need to make sure that their food choices are really iron rich. So baked beans, lentils, iron in, what do you call it? Iron in, not enhanced, but you guys know what I mean. Breakfast cereals that have more iron in them. I think Nutrigrain is one that specifically says it. And then leafy green vegetables as well. If you do find that you are feeling flat and tired and it's persisting and you can't train as well, it's important to consult an expert who will first find out if you're iron deficient by way of blood test, and then will help you solve the problem by increasing the iron in your diet or other medical means, which I don't want to go into. That's for an expert to talk to you about if it becomes necessary. I've had to do this myself, and really quite ironically, in the last couple of months, I've had some time off due to uni, haven't done much training, came back to training in the last week or so and have felt like absolute rubbish. And it occurred to me just in the last, probably 4 days ago, that I'm probably a bit low in iron for a number of reasons. I haven't been taking good care of myself. So I'm addressing that problem myself and feeling better already. Anyway, so around consulting an expert, lots of us within the club like to think we know a lot, and we do know a fair bit, but we're not experts. Everything that I'm talking to you about today is based on quite a bit of reading that I've done and a lot of experience. A little bit later or shortly, I'll be talking about stuff which is actually in my wheelhouse in physio, but the nutritional type stuff, I'm definitely not an expert. So I'm happy to give you quite basic information, and you can find any of this sort of stuff on the internet. But if you need more help, speak to a professional, particularly if you're dealing with an issue like iron, or if you think you might need some help with red S. Now, I sort of think the most important experts for us will be a dietitian, not a nutritionist. They are different. A nutritionist isn't a protected term. So anyone can call themselves a nutritionist with a little bit of education. But a dietitian goes to university, does a full degree. They're quite specialist in their field, and it is a protected term. Not anyone can call themselves a dietitian. So if you want very good advice, that's the person to go to. Sports docs, also very, very good. I've used them myself over the years for when it's appropriate. They can particularly help you with the medical management of a lot of issues, both with broken parts of your body, but then also nutrition and so on. I think the first person that is typically quite good to see, though, is your GP. Your GP is a generalist. They can, they're very good at what they do in terms of identifying problems and then referring on to appropriate specialists. So if you think you could have an issue, chat with your GP. They can get you some blood work done and then send you off to the appropriate place to go. Okay, that's that little rant done. All right, next, rest and recovery. So as I'm sure you are well aware, when you train, you're fatiguing your body and you're causing it little bits of damage which it has to repair. And that repair process leads to adaptation and performance improvement. But without enough rest and recovery, your body can't properly complete the physiological processes which allow it to adapt to the training load. So you'll see a graph there which has the stages of training. So I'm just thinking I need a pointer, but I don't have a pointer. Anyway, hang on. Hopefully you can see this. So when you start training, you end up with some performance decline. So as you're fatiguing, you can't train as much, exactly as Gun was saying earlier. And then you end up sort of down in this stage where you have a bit of a rest and you have some recovery, and then your body rebuilds itself. So it's adapting. And then you'll see here that the graph levels off and it's now higher than it was before. So that's your improvement. That training phase recovery has led to that improvement. So every time you go through a cycle of training recovery, you will get a little bit better, but you will not get better without that recovery. You just go down into a hole. So that process needs rest. And rest means having naps during the day, getting good sleep during the night, and making sure that you have rest days. And then recovery is good nutrition, and it's also relaxation, and that can be both mental and physical. So physical relaxation is all around like having a massage or sitting in a spa bath or doing those sorts of things that make you feel relaxed in a physical sense. But then mental relaxation is almost, I was going to say almost as important, but just as important. So when you're stressed out, your body releases cortisol, and that's a hormone which has a catabolic effect in your body. So anything with a catabolic effect breaks things down. And cortisol breaks down protein, and your muscles are protein. So that leads to reduced muscle mass. So you get weaker because you don't have as much muscle. And it also inhibits the body from being able to repair itself. So what I would really like to impress upon you is that when it comes to training, more is not more. Sometimes you might feel like you're not doing enough. But trust me, if you're doing what the coaches are telling you to do, it's enough. We've got some really good, very experienced coaches in our team who will guide you well. So trust them. And if you really feel like you're not doing enough, let's move on to the next slide. Prehab and rehab. So when you start any new physical activity, you really should bear in mind that your body isn't going to be well equipped for the new demands that's placed on it. On a day, your body's very good at doing what it does on a day-to-day basis, but when you ask it to do more, it won't be so well adapted. And triathlon is so much more because there's 3 different disciplines involved. So you might have come to triathlon with a background in a particular sport. If it's cycling or running, your upper body won't have seen much action. If it's swimming, your lower body will have worked, but not in a weight-bearing position. And weight-bearing or non-weight bearing is very important in terms of how your body works. It's really common that when you start a new sport that your body's not used to the biomechanical requirements of, you'll get niggles and injuries, particularly if you don't do the rest and recovery that you are encouraged to do. So almost all of us have got certain strength imbalances, which we don't notice because our everyday life doesn't require us to use different things in different ways. But when we start a new activity, they'll show up. And you might not even notice it at first. The body is really good at adapting new strategies to overcome effects of imbalances. But unfortunately, the strategies that your body might come up with usually are less than ideal and will typically result in other issues, and they present as niggles and injuries. So one of the best ways to avoid these kinds of problems is to do some strength and conditioning work, which will help balance you out a bit and put you into good shape to be able to do the work that you need to do. And I cannot impress upon you enough how important it is to get good strength and good motor patterns as well. So you might do something in a way which isn't great, and it's not a strength issue, it's just the way that you do it, and that might contribute to problems. So it is important that we not only make sure that you're strong enough to do stuff, but also that you're doing it well. Now, this is all the prehab part, and this was what I was talking to some of you who were at the run session a while ago. Just doing some simple exercises. So squats, starting with double leg squats and then moving on to single leg squats. Squats are an amazing exercise, and they work so many things in so many functional different ways, and they're really, really helpful. I strongly encourage you to do regular squats. Deadlifts are also really good. They work some different muscles, but ones that you will use all the time. And then calf raises, double leg, single leg, and weight and so on. So they're the exercises that I would encourage doing for the lower limb and the pelvis. And then for the shoulders, internal and external rotation exercises. Now, I know that's probably not overly helpful at the moment, just saying the words, but I'm putting together some videos. I'm almost finished the first one, which will be available really soon. But in the meantime, I'm happy to show anyone any of those exercises at any time. I feel so strongly about them. They will help you. Now, the other thing that we do have, last year I put together a library of Pilates sessions on our YouTube channel. They're around about 30 minutes long, and they include both strength and stretch sessions. Last year I was doing Pilates teacher training, and I used the club as guinea pigs, and they're not too bad if you feel like having a look at them. Okay, so now to the rehab part. So if and when you end up with a niggle or an injury, the best way to solve that problem is to go and see a professional, a physio, and to follow their advice. There's no other way around it. You've just got to do what they tell you to do. Now, let me explain why. There's a treatment approach in physio called supervised neglect. And the basis of that is basically pretty much anything will get better if you leave it alone and stop causing it more damage. So if you stop doing whatever caused you the injury, it will eventually get better. But when you go back to the same activity that caused you the injury, if you don't improve the underlying problem, you'll get injured again. So the injury has identified for you where the problem is, and then your physio will then give you a home exercise program, which is designed to improve the strength imbalance or the dodgy motor pattern or whatever it is, to allow you to go back to the activity which caused the problem, but with a decreased risk of future injury. But this can't happen unless you follow their instructions. So pretty much every injury is treated by physiotherapy in the same way. We always advocate a period of relative deloading. Now, that doesn't mean you just rest, because that's counterproductive, but you do need to back off what you're doing a bit or do something different. You'll do some in-clinic manual therapy, so hands-on type treatment that the physio do, And this is mostly because patients want it and it makes you feel a little bit better in the short term. But it is only the tiniest little part of physiotherapy treatment. And then the last part of treatment and management is a progressive home exercise program, which is specifically designed to address the underlying problem. Now, there's just no other way around physiotherapy treatment. All of those things have to happen. So in summary, this slide, do some regular strength and conditioning work. And if you get injured, do what your physio tells you to do. Okay. Now, this is something that I learnt quite a bit about this year. I do apologise if this conversation makes anyone uncomfortable, but it is a very important conversation. So, and I probably think this is one of the most important exercises that you can add to your day in terms of strength and conditioning, and this is pelvic floor muscle training. I've got here a picture. This is a boy pelvis from the top. This is a girl pelvis from the top. And you'll notice that the musculature is very similar. The male and female pelvis have all the same muscles. The boys have just two more, and that's associated with erectile function. So this conversation is for both males and females. Unfortunately, urinary incontinence is something that's really quite rarely discussed and often a source of a lot of embarrassment, especially in younger populations. And I think that's because it's commonly thought to be a female problem and caused by birthing babies, especially. And I think that's because we only really hear about needing to do pelvic floor muscle training when we're pregnant or we know someone who's pregnant. Now, urinary incontinence is a problem which affects both men and women. And when you look at athletic populations, the prevalence and incidence for both men and women is higher than in the general population. So pelvic floor muscle dysfunction is a lack of adequate performance of the muscles, which acts as a sling to support the pelvic organs. So all of those muscles there. Now, pelvic floor muscle dysfunction doesn't just result in urinary incontinence, but it can also result in pelvic organ prolapse. And what that means is the bits that are supposed to be on the inside, they fall out of the orifices to the outside, and that is pretty uncool. Now, there's a really wide range of risk factors for pelvic floor muscle dysfunction, but the biggest one, which is caused by lots of things, is increased intra-abdominal pressure. So, pressure inside your guts. And that can be caused by pregnancy, obesity, having a chronic cough, being chronically constipated, and having poor urination and defecation dynamics. So that intra-abdominal pressure pushes your pelvic floor down, and that's not good. Now, one of the most important things for us, though, is high impact physical activity. And in our case, that's going to be running. So without a strong pelvic floor to keep everything up where it's supposed to be, gravity will pull it down when we run. And that stretches the pelvic floor muscles, and then everything falls out where you don't want it to fall out. Now, personally, I struggle with pelvic floor muscle dysfunction. I had a long list of risk factors when I was having my babies, and I didn't do the pelvic floor muscles exercises as and when I should have. It has been an ongoing process for me, which I am getting a little bit better at working on. But unfortunately, the difficulty that I now have is because I didn't take care of it when my pelvic floor was still in really good shape, it's a lot harder for me to solve the problem now. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. So I urge you to learn from me. Incorporate some pelvic floor muscle training into your day as soon as you can. And there will be a video coming very soon where I will teach you how to do pelvic floor exercises and give you some background information on how it works. I hope to have that maybe by the end of the week. But I'm also really happy to have a one-on-one discussion or a group discussion if anyone wants that as well. But if you're in the same position as I'm in, all's not lost though. I really want you to know that. Grab me for a chat if you want to. I have plenty of management strategies and I have tried all sorts of things over the years to make it less of an issue for me. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. Alternatively, go and see pelvic health physio, especially if you already have a problem. Pelvic health physios are specialists. They have specialised training, which you don't get in the undergraduate physio program. What they teach us at undergraduate level is how to teach people how to do the exercises, how to do real-time ultrasound to check that the muscles are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then how to identify issues that need to be referred on. But the pelvic health physios, they are sensational, absolute rock stars when it comes to that stuff. All right. Now on to other stuff which might make everyone feel a bit more comfortable or not. Some of these are quite funny. So I want to talk a little bit about the 3 disciplines. So starting with the swim. Sorry, I just distracted myself completely there for a second. So body glide, lube and baby oil. Body glide, baby oil are very important things to have in your kit bag, particularly when you start doing swims that require a wetsuit, because a wetsuit has the potential to give you a wetsuit bite, and it's basically a graze particularly around the neck, where the neoprene rubber kind of grabs your skin and causes a bit of a welt, and it's horrible. So you can use something like body glide or baby oil around that area to help prevent that. Baby oil is also really good on your shoulders and around your hips and your bum. So a light coating of it before you put your wetsuit on will make it a lot easier for your wetsuit to come off in transition. And you can also put it around your calves a little bit as well, not on your feet, because that'll make you all super slippery and that would be bad too. The other thing I want to mention just very quickly is also have some plastic bags in if you're wearing a wetsuit, have some plastic bags in your wetsuit bag. It'll really help you get your wetsuit on over your feet and your hands. Trust me, just put them in, ask someone to show you how to use them when it comes time to do that. Okay, so the recording cut out, so I'm just going to re-record the last part of the presentation. So carrying on from the last bit, so we're on to comfort on the bike. What's going to bring you the most amount of comfort on the bike? The top 3 things in the list, and the 4th actually, to be fair. Your cycling or triathlon chamois inside your pants, chamois cream, and TITS. And that TITS stands for time in the saddle. So those 3 things in particular are going to be what will give you comfort on the bike. You can buy things like gel covers or super soft seats, but ultimately they really don't ameliorate the problems, and these 3 things will do that for you. So there's a number of different types of chamois that you can get in cycling and triathlon suits. A cycling chamois, the padding inside the necks, they tend to be quite thick. And then your triathlon necks, the chamois are much, much thinner, and that can range anywhere from being a thin sponge through to just basically little more than a piece of felt that's in the necks. There's also different shapes in terms of width and length. long and narrow chamois is going to be more designed for men because they have the narrower pelvis that we saw in the earlier slide about your pelvic floor, and the women's chamois tend to be a lot wider and a bit shorter to have more coverage around the perineal area. Although there are anatomically appropriate styles of the cycling mix, it's very much an individual thing. And it'll also be very much specific as to what you're doing. So when I'm out just cycling, I have nicks that have a cycling chamois in it, chamois. But for racing, I will only ever use a triathlon nick, and that's also where the decision comes for me is which bike I'm riding. So on my road bike, I'll usually wear cycling shorts, but on the TT bike, irrespective of whether or not I'm riding that in a triathlon, I will only ever use triathlon nicks because it's just more comfortable. And that's even the case on the triathlon bike, which has a saddle which is incredibly firm. I do refer to it as being like a piece of wood wrapped in leather. It's so hard with very, very little padding. And I'm much more comfortable even during a very long race. So Ironman, I can be on the bike between 8 and 10 hours, depending on how slow I'm going on the day. And it's still very comfortable, even though I have a very thin chamois in the Trinix. And where that comfort comes from is twofold. One is with the chamois cream, which I strongly recommend that you find something that works well for you. And any of the what's on the slide, with the exception of the Gurney Goo, I can't say I've tried that on a chamois, but any of the other ones are really quite good, and they work a bit differently. They have different feels, but you apply liberally, and probably the key with chamois cream, particularly for women, is avoid anything on your chamois that has menthol in it, because once the menthol hits a mucous membrane, it burns. It really burns, and it's quite awful. So that's sort of the only real guidance. Some of them feel greasier. Some stay on better. It's very much a personal choice. Trav uses the one that's in the grey container. It has menthol in it, so as I said, don't recommend that for the women. The ASOS one is quite good. You just slap that everywhere. The Morgan Blue is also quite good, but it's a bit more like Vaseline. It's not Vaseline, and I don't recommend using Vaseline on your chamois, but it has a bit more of that texture. Body Glide is what I use most of the time. You apply a layer to yourself and a layer to your chamois, particularly around the stitching, and that works really quite well for me. That's something to also consider when you are buying your cycling nicks. Have a look at the stitching. Have a look at how smooth or soft it feels. Have a look to see whether or not there's foam along the edges, because much like the neoprene in your wetsuit, it can cause some chafing because it's quite sticky, being rubberish, and it can chafe your skin as well. So have a look at all of those things when you are out there buying chamois or anything with a chamois in it, basically. And then the most important thing, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because this is the God honest truth, time in the saddle is the key to cycling comfort. Unfortunately, there's just no two ways around it. To be more comfortable on the bike, you need to spend more time on the bike. You toughen up. Imagine it like you forming calluses on your undercarriage. You're not, but you just get so much more used to being in the saddle. Now, sunscreen, the message here for both the bike and the run is the same. If you're going to be on the bike for a while, make sure that you have sunscreen everywhere that's going to see the sun. I know that sounds ridiculous, but there's places that you might not think of. So definitely on the back of your neck, behind your ears, on top of your ears, and also your lower back. If you end up wearing a two-piece tri-suit or cycle gear, spend some time in a bit of a flexed position, so bent over, and you'll probably notice that you get some ride up in between your nicks and your top. That area will burn. I was unaware of this when I did, I think it was the first Ironman. I ended up with a 2-year tramp stamp on my lower back. I got such a terrible burn. It took 2 years for it to fade, to disappear. I didn't discover that it was there until I got in the shower after the race, and it was an excruciating pain when the water hit it. So learn that lesson from me. Sunscreen there, or you can also use like a big broad piece of tape, that white hospital tape called Fixamol. That works really well. You stick it on before your race and it will stay there all day. Quick tip about sunscreen, below the eyes only. Don't put it on your forehead because you will sweat, it will run down into your eyes and it will burn. You're going to have some sort of hat on all day anyway when you're racing, be it your cycle hat, or a hat or a visor when you're running. So sunscreen below the eyes only. On the run, you need to be looking after your feet. You will find if you haven't come from a running background, haven't spent a lot of time doing it, when you start doing a bit more running, you'll find the spots. You'll end up with certain parts of you that, certain parts of your feet, that blister. You might get, some sore spots, hot spots. You can do a couple of things to help alleviate that problem. Stick some lube or some tape on those spots when you find it. So Body Glide's really good, and that gurney goo that's in the picture, that is sensational for that running sort of chafing. And you can use that like under your arms, in terms of like if you have any bingo wing trouble, which I do sometimes, you get a bit of chafing, you can use it there. Under any lumpy bits that you might have, that works really well there. Has some menthol in it, so again, avoid mucous membranes. And another thing about your feet, a podiatrist friend of mine chastises me regularly about not removing calluses from my feet. And what I do find often is where there are calluses, I'll end up with blisters. You can get a really nice pumice stone from the chemist. It looks like a block of soap. It's black and it's like sandpaper. They're only about $5. Not all chemists keep them, but you will be able to find them. And if you can't, I can help you out there. But they're really good to get rid of calluses, and that's something I highly recommend. And then the other thing is just make sure that you've got any sand off your feet before you put your feet into socks to get onto the bike or the run, because any sand in your socks is going to act like sandpaper and hurt. And then I'll just repeat the message again around the sunscreen. So next slide, chest issues. As I said during the live presentation, couldn't think of what else to call this slide, so chest issues it is, anything on the front of you basically. So for the females in the group, the choice is going to be really individual, but basically most women, other than those people who have very little endowment, will wear a crop top or a sports bra under their tri-kit. Personally, I wear a form-fitting crop top. It's a racerback style. It's a Nike brand. Keeps everything nice and firm in place and prevents fabrics from being see-through, especially when they're wet. Unpadded or unlined sports bras would be a better choice than padded, because the padded ones are going to soak up water and they will get uncomfortable and probably cause some chafing. I'd also avoid anything that has any wires in them, because they are just going to dig in and cause you some issues. For both males and females, but mostly the males, and this is only because typically females have something on under their tri-kit or their shirt. A sweaty or wet top and friction is going to equal bleeding nipples. If you've not had the pleasure of experiencing or seeing someone who has bleeding nipples in the past, a quick Google search will tell you all you need to know about that. Trav has experience as well on some photos, so if you ask him nicely, I'm sure he'll share his own stories. But yeah, most people that I know will use some sort of lubricant, like anti-friction cream, so Body Glide or something similar. Others use tape like the Fixamol, or even Band-Aids. There are some photos out there of Trav with Dora the Explorer Band-Aids on his nipples. So basically, just anything that's going to minimise the friction between your nipples and the shirt, if it happens to be wet, is going to be a good thing. Anything that you stick on, it might be obvious, might not be. When you take it off, if you've got hairy nipples, you might have some unintended hair removal happening, which could be painful. So just bear that in mind. Okay, all right, questions. Now, I'm just having a bit of a think back. There were a couple of questions last night, which Lasani's questions about the chamois, I hope I answered properly this time. And then there was another question around period management during racing for women. So basically, if you use tampons, continue to use tampons if you're comfortable doing so. I personally moved over to using menstrual cups a while ago, a couple of years ago, and if anything, I find that better for period management during racing, particularly long racing, because the cup stays in place for longer than a tampon does. So that's just my own view. Pads aren't going to be suitable for, you know, the obvious reasons of the swim. Period pants were also suggested, which would have the same issue as using pads. But I did also, and that just reminded me of the other thing I forgot it again. And also period pants wouldn't work. You might be able to use period swimwear. I've not used that myself, so I'm not sure how effective it is. But that is is there as an option. But the thing that I did forget around cycling shorts, which I was just reminded about with the underpants conversation, was when you're wearing cycle knits or a tri kit, don't wear underpants underneath it. Because where the underpants sit will dig in and will promote some chafing. So it might seem a little bit weird, and I know it certainly did for me when someone told me that you didn't wear underpants with your cycle shorts, but I assure you it is significantly more comfortable if you don't have undies on at the same time. All right. I think that was all in terms of questions. If you do have any questions after watching this later on, feel free to send me a message and I'll answer anything that I can. And don't forget, Slim as your novice coach is always available to provide any advice that you might need. And Trav is also always available and quite happy to give both solicited and unsolicited advice as requested. Okay, thanks for joining me. See you next time.